AEW All Out is coming up on August 31st. That's their next big pay-per-view and really their final... I don't know if it's their final show altogether or just their final big show. I'm not aware of them doing any sort of live events after that until they go to TNT. So this is probably the last AEW show before they go to television. And that, of course, is going to be taking place in Chicago at the Sears Center, the site of the All In show last year. They're kind of they're back to where it all began. Still no word, by the way, on that television show, on a date or a time. And the more I think about this, maybe there's a reason TNT is holding off. Maybe they really haven't confirmed it yet. But my guess might be that there's a chance they're doing this on purpose. That they already know the date, they know the time, and they're holding off as long as they possibly can to give WWE as little time as they could have to counter-program against them on that night. Whether it's NXT or some other kind of weird one-time special they decide to do, especially after what happened with the whole Fight for the Fallen thing. That was a great illustration that WWE is down to play, is down to play games. It's not above them to do that. So maybe they're holding off as long as they can, and they're saying, look, we're just going to wait as long as we can until we can't wait anymore, and that way we give them less of a chance to put something on against us. It's just a theory. That may not be the case, but I was thinking about that. Because we're getting awfully close, and we've heard nothing. We've gotten little hints dropped. The belief is that it's going to be Wednesdays at 8 p.m. for 2 hours live, starting October 2nd. Now, if that's the case, okay, that would be Wednesday, October 2nd, would be the debut of AEW on TNT. That Friday, October 4th, is the SmackDown debut live on Fox. And that Sunday is my birthday. So much for hoping for a light workload that weekend. And so perhaps it was no coincidence that AEW chose Wednesday at 8 p.m. this past week to debut its new Road to All Out video series on YouTube. Trying to condition people to that date and time, possibly. They do a great job with these videos. I've said this before, I'll give them props again. They do a great job on this content. The first installment of this new series was no different. They had highlights from Fight for the Fallen, and then, out of nowhere, they pitched it to a Control Center segment with none other than Tony Schiavone, who I was shocked to see, if only because he's still under a multi-year contract with MLW. That's what they announced in April of last year. They put a press release out when he was signed, that it was a multi-year deal. That was the language at that time that they used. You know who else was shocked? Court Bauer, the CEO of MLW, who put out a statement saying that unless AEW elects to reach out, Tony cannot proceed with AEW or any other company doing anything. I was unaware of him doing the digital stuff until I read about it in this week's Observer. That is how the head of MLW found out that one of his lead announcers, one of his lead gets, was doing work for another promotion. He read about it in the Observer. So, Bauer, not very happy. He's probably not too happy about MJF signing a long-term deal this week with AEW either, which means that his days in MLW may be numbered, although he is still there. Someone asked Schiavone on Twitter flat out. They said, hey, Tony, are you working for AEW? And he said, I am not. I just like to help Cody Rhodes out when I can. And so that is why I guess he was asked. I don't know if he volunteered to help, but they must have come to him and say, hey, would you be willing to help out and do some old school kind of event center type stuff? And Tony said, sure. Why not? I guess without clearing it with his boss. But Schiavone has been away from MLW now for months. He's due back on TV, I believe, next month, sometime in the next few weeks, which is why they brought Jim Cornette in recently, with Tony being away. And what happened is that when MLW moved its taping schedule from Friday to Saturday, which they did back in February, I believe, of this year, he had other commitments. Friday was fine, but when they moved the taping schedule, he still announces AAA baseball and college basketball. And those are still his top priorities. I'm willing to bet that if you went to him and said, where does your real passion lie? Is it in the minor league sports that you call, or is it in the wrestling? I mean, he probably wouldn't even hesitate for a split second to tell you that it's still the minor league baseball and the college basketball. So now I guess he's coming back, at least for a while, and then he may well disappear again. But just hearing him and Jim Ross in that video, albeit in different segments of the video this week, it's just a nostalgia trip. Yeah, it's just cool. And he pitched it to an Adam Page promo where he talked about the eye injury that Chris Jericho gave him at Fight for the Fallen. And then Jim Ross conducted a sit-down interview with Shawn Spears, who confirmed that the reason he waffled Cody with that chair shot was because Cody had the audacity in one of their videos to call him a good hand. That's one of the worst things that you could call another wrestler, he said. And he considered Cody one of maybe 5 people in all of his years in the wrestling business that he was truly close to and truly considered a good friend. One of only 5 people. You can count it on one hand. But not anymore. He called him a leech. He said Cody uses people to advance his own career. He name-dropped Hardcore Holly and Ted DiBiase Jr., Damian Sandow, whose last name... For some reason, they bleeped his last name. For some inexplicable reason, I have no idea. I guess maybe, is it a curse word now? You know, go Sandow yourself? I don't know. But then at the end, Tully Blanchard walks in. He whispers something into Shawn's ear, and he ends the interview. So it looks like Shawn Spears has found himself a new manager in Tully Blanchard, or I guess advisor. They're calling him an advisor. Kind of like Bobby Heenan was the financial advisor, and Mr. Perfect was the executive consultant for Ric Flair in WWE back in the day. So he is the advisor now for Shawn Spears. Blanchard has signed what they're calling a multi-show agreement. And you know what? If giving Shawn Spears sounds familiar, giving him a manager, that is, I pitched that idea here on the podcast 3 years ago on Sound Off 475. Jerry Lawler at the time was teasing this idea that he might sign a talent deal, not just a new deal to broadcast, but a talent deal with WWE, which I don't think he ever did. But at the time, he was teasing it, and I thought, well, he's obviously not going to wrestle. So perhaps that means he's going to serve as a manager or a mouthpiece for somebody on the roster. And I remember looking at the rosters at that time, and I didn't really see anybody that I thought he would be a good fit for until I took a look at the NXT roster. And I saw one guy on that NXT roster who stood out to me as a person who could really benefit from having somebody like Lawler around him. And that was Ty Dillinger. And the idea being that they had just come off doing this storyline with Dillinger in NXT, where he was losing all the time. He went on this horrible losing streak. And he was having serious doubts about his career. You know, do I belong here anymore? Is this the end for me? And my thought at the time was, well, why not bring him up to the main roster and do something similar in front of a bigger audience? Because my fear and my assumption was that the whole 10 thing, the perfect 10 thing, would be really over when he debuts, right? I even say, he might debut at number 10 in the Royal Rumble match, which he ended up doing. And if he does, I bet he gets a big reaction, which he did. And he'll be over for a while, but only in the way that Fandango was over for a while. And then what? Then what happens? And that's exactly how it played out. But the idea would have been, this guy is down in the doldrums, right? He has this great debut for a few months. Everything seems to be going well. And the same thing happens where he starts losing. He starts getting jobbed out to this guy and that guy. And he's just really down in the dumps. And Lawler happens to come up to him or come across him one day in the back. And he says, he sees something that reminds him of some of the greats that he wrestled down in Memphis. And he wants to take Dillinger under his wing and give him some advice. And he would end up being a heel out of all this. But they didn't do anything with him once the Perfect 10 stuff died down. They didn't even give the Perfect 10 stuff a chance to, I think, be as big as it could have been. Maybe at least an idea like that, it was not going to make him a main eventer, but at least it would have prolonged his career or his push or whatever words you want to use a little bit longer. Spears can talk. He doesn't necessarily need a manager talking for him. He can talk very well. I thought he showed that here in this interview. But now you add Tully for a few shows. The Horseman connection to the Rhodes family, Tully planning strategy with Spears. It's very old school. I like it. I'm still a fan of old school wrestling managers. And right now, AEW is giving a lot of lip service to fans about we're going to make wins and losses mean something in our company, and all those types of things. They're talking a big talk. But bringing back the art of the wrestling manager should be another. And I know WWE has Paul Heyman with Brock Lesnar. It's not like they don't have any sort of, and they don't call him a manager. He's an advocate, but he's a fucking manager. I mean, that's what he is. So they have a few of those in WWE. They haven't completely eliminated them, Zelina Vega and people like that. But for so long, Vince McMahon clearly, just watch the television. He clearly saw very little, if any, value in managers. Wouldn't even call them managers. Would not even call them by that name. And I really think it hurt the product. I think there's a lot of people who did not get over. And the difference between getting over and not getting over could have come down to having a good manager, a good mouthpiece in their corner. And I think it really hurt the product. But I think they can still be incredibly valuable. So that match is now official for the All Out card, which looks like this. We've got Chris Jericho and Hangman Adam Page to crown the first ever AEW champion. Jon Moxley against Kenny Omega. Cody takes on Shawn Spears, like I mentioned. The Young Bucks and the Lucha Bros are going to have a ladder match for the AAA Tag Team titles. That's going to be insane, I'm sure. And the Dark Order takes on the Best Friends, Beretta and Chucky T, for a bye in the Tag Team tournament that's coming up. It's going to be starting on the TNT show, and the winner of that match gets a bye to the next round of that tournament. I'm sure MJF will be there, Jungle Boy, Luchasaurus, and they tease something at Fight for the Fallen with Awesome Kong and Aja Kong, maybe a tag team match. I could see Brandy and Kong against Aja and a partner of her choice. I should also note, I guess this, I mentioned this like it's an afterthought. It became such a big story this week. But I should also note that CM Punk has been announced for StarCast that weekend in Chicago. Which does not mean that he's going to be at All Out. In fact, right now I'm kind of tending towards the idea that he won't be. But we're going to hear about this non-stop until that weekend. And as we get closer to the 31st, it's only going to get worse. So be prepared. But I leave you with this honest question before we move on. Honest question. Do you want to see CM Punk come back to wrestling? And that's whether AEW, WWE, Ring of Honor, whatever. Do you want to see CM Punk come back to pro wrestling? It's been over 5 years now. Forget the little, surprise indie appearances under a mask. It's been 5 years. Over 5 years. Since we have truly seen him in pro wrestling. Would you be any more or less excited to see him back in the ring and even to see him in an AEW ring? I suspect I'm going to get a lot of divided opinion on that, but we're so short on big names to bring back when you think of who could they bring in to really make an impact. Like there's a lot of really talented young stars that we may not know too much about, and hopefully they'll get a chance to shine on that show too, just like WCW for a period of time. When Nitro first got going, we got exposed to a lot of faces that a lot of people had never seen before from all parts of the world. And I hope AEW can do the same thing. But there are so few big names to bring back at this point. Names who aren't, completely old and washed up. He was definitely a big name for a while. I'm not going to put him in the same conversation with Austin and Hogan and people like that, but he was definitely a big name in wrestling for a number of years. And I think there's definite value in it, but what do you think? Do you want him back? Or are you of the opinion of, to hell with that guy, he left wrestling behind? Wrestling doesn't need him.